Just give me a second. All right. Okay, so good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining tonight. My name is Armando Flores. I'm a financial consultant or wealth advisor for the DeVere China Group. I'm now based in Hong Kong, but I'm still with both DeVere China and DeVere Hong Kong offices. And today I'm joined with Ricardo Lugo. So, Ricardo, I can just let you introduce yourself briefly so you can also tell the audience about yourself, what you do, your company, and then we just basically get started. And yeah, thank you for joining, Ricardo, as well.
Sure. Thanks. Can you hear me fine? I just want to check.
Yeah, all good, all
Okay,
good.
good. Okay, good. Yeah. Well, good night, everybody. Yeah, my name is Ricardo. So I'm a insurance broker for Pacific Prime. I'm based in Shanghai. So yeah, I've been working in the insurance business for about 5 years. So we're going to be talking a little bit about, financial planning and also just assuring your family's risks throughout the night. So I'm glad to join Armando here on this.
Yeah, no, thank you for joining. I think we did one, but that was maybe in Spanish. So we wanted to
Yeah.
mix it up because obviously the expats come in on shape and forms, including different languages. And the idea of today just focusing on families. As you mentioned, we'll focus on medical situation, uh, other kind of protections that are very important for parents, in my opinion. I think the first session we had versus today is also very different because now I was not a parent back then, and now I am parent of two children, so I can also reflect on myself as we are going to cover some of these topics. And but yeah, I think it's a very important topic, especially for international families living in China, where we know that living in China has a lot of benefits, uh, having great exposure to a new culture, good career opportunities, and life events that we're all gonna like keep with ourselves for so long. But at the same time, there's so many challenges that include whether we get the proper coverage through our employment or different things that we are going to discover and talk about while we have this session today. So before we jump into the actual session, I just want to let you know you have this chat box where I'm sure many by now should be super familiar with Zoom, but if in case you haven't joined a Zoom webinar before, you can just use the chat box to send any questions you may have throughout the session. Ideally, I suggest on the who can see the message, I would suggest you to choose everyone, and usually that creates more involvement of the audience. But if not, you can also send directly to the host and panelists. So, without further ado, let's quickly talk about what's the situation, right? So, there are many cases and many different types of families. At the end of the day, both having a consultant like Ricardo who specializes in protection and mitigating risk, or talking with a financial planner like myself, it all comes to your own personal situation. So while we are gonna cover some generic information about these topics, obviously it's usually better to just get individualized or personalized guidance because yeah, at the end of the day, it all depends. Sometimes it gets very boring when they ask me questions. So what should I do? It all depends. But that's the truth when it comes to your individual circumstances. But yeah, as I talk about, there are some interesting things that we need to consider now that we live overseas, especially since I would say 95% of foreigners won't be in China forever. So that's where you need to find what's the best solution for your case, whether that's medical protection, whether that's education planning for your kids or anything else in between. And and in my view, it all starts with the medical aspect. So I will definitely gonna pass this to Ricardo to focus on that because he's the expert on that. So yeah, what do you wanna share? I think you should be able to, yeah,
Yeah, I
share.
think
Okay.
I think I can share my screen here. Let me just find the right option. Second. So it should be working now. Yeah, Perfect. Yeah. So yeah, thanks, Armando. Yeah, just to summarize a little bit, I will try to keep it quite simple with the slides. I just prepared a few slides to sort of cover the main points. But what I'm going to be discussing is a little bit about the medical coverage, right, as a base to have that sort of like risk control that risk exposure when we are abroad. So just to touch on the first health insurance for raising children abroad, and I put it as families as well. Why is it important? Well, there's a couple of points. So first of all, for financial security and peace of mind, I think Armando will dig into that later on. But obviously, when we're traveling abroad, we lose sort of that comfort or that we can rely on of being in our home country, right? So that's a big part of it. Now, navigating a different healthcare system, I think for most of us that are coming from different parts of the world, I'm from Latin America, but like European people as well, we do not have the access to the social security system that we do back home when we're in a foreign country, right? For example, me being in China, is not only the fact that we don't have access to that, but also if we want to use the let's say the public healthcare system and paying out of pocket for that is not as easy. There's language barriers. There's not knowing how the system works. So that's an important factor that plays into this. Then getting access to quality healthcare. So even if you are looking into visiting public institutions for healthcare, when you're abroad, the top doctors, the top specialists are always going to be, especially nowadays, are getting more and more expensive. So having a good health coverage is important, not only if you want to have access to private providers, but also if you want to have access to top public providers. And then the last point that I put here is handling emergencies. So this is more about when you find the right insurance option, is not only to cover you for the risk, to cover the expenses themselves, but also the right provider is going to be able to assist you during emergencies. So this is whenever there is like a medical emergency situation, or even just with guidance on which hospital to go, which doctors can help with a very specific a condition or disease, which sometimes we don't know because we are obviously not familiar with the local environment when we first get to a new country. But the insurers are familiar with that, yeah, right? They deal with many cases throughout the year, so they can also give advice during those emergency times. Um, so I added a few points of what I would consider will be the main considerations when you are choosing a health insurance plan, and what's the most important that I will consider when you're choosing an insurance plan and you have children involved, right? So the first one will be, of course, the coverage for the children needs. So children will have different needs than adults, as we know, and this includes not only pediatric care, but like vaccinations or common child illnesses that don't necessarily or are not necessarily covered by all of the insurance plans in the market, right? So it's a point to consider if you have young children, particularly, that these type of benefits are not going to be included in every single plan. So it's something that you have to take a look into and see if your insurance plan will cover for that. Then global coverage and network access. So for expatriates living abroad, right? So obviously we want to have coverage in the country that we're living. To put an example, myself in China, but also we want to have coverage where we are going to be traveling too often. If you're a professional that travels often for work, or where you would like to be treated. So let's say you have your children, and there's if there's an emergency situation or a surgical procedure, something complex that's going to happen, you would like to do that at home, then that's something to consider as well, right? Like you want to be doing that at home, where maybe you have family that can help you with taking care of the burden during those situations. So you would like to also contemplate that to have cover also back in your home country, right? I put emergency evacuation and repatriation. So as expats, this is also important part to consider. It's a little bit connected to the previous one as well. So it's just a matter of being covered where you need to be covered. And this is an important part because I know myself, for example, I live in Shanghai. It's a big city, so I don't really run into the risk of not being able to be covered locally if something serious were to happen. But some of you may be working in a more remote place, particularly, for example, in Southeast Asia, or just travel a lot for work in a smaller town, or even just being on holiday with your kids, right? And you have an emergency, so you want to have access to a benefit that is able to transfer you to a nearest place that can properly treat you. And this will be the evacuation or the repatriation benefits. And then the last part, so looking into family-friendly benefits. If you're having children, if you're planning to have children, or if you already have children, there are plans that are particularly tailored for that can give you family discounts, or that also include those benefits that I talked to in the first point, which are, vaccination, pediatric care, and so on, or dental treatment, for example, for children when they start having that need for dental treatment. Um, yeah, the next slide is to so once we have identified what is important to consider when you're choosing an insurance plan, then there are a few different type of insurance plans that are available to us, right? So just I try to keep it very simple here, just to give an overlook. Obviously, an insurance, as Armando said, is insurance and financial planning is such a complex topic that is always better to talk one by one. For each one of us is going to have individual needs depending on your children's age, on your family's structure. But just to try to summarize, this will be the main three categories. We will have first the international health insurance. So this has a couple of advantages. So the main one will be global coverage. So for expats, that can be very important, right? Unrestricted medical network, meaning you can have access to pretty much any hospital that you wish, whether it's public, private, it doesn't really matter. You can have access to all of them. And portability, which can be important as well for us, which is the possibility to take the plan with you if you relocate to a different country. So this will be what I would say is the top three advantages of this. It comes with a few cons. There's a higher premium for this type of plan because it will be the most high-end plan that you could possibly get. And then, particularly depending on the insurer, the claim process may take additional time because we're talking about international transactions, right? But yeah, that would be a quick overlook at the international plans. This is what most people will refer to as an expat insurance. Then you have the local health insurance. This applies to China, this applies to Thailand, Indonesia, basically any country where you could be working as a foreigner, you will be able to see these options. These options are usually a bit cheaper because they're tailored to the local healthcare system. So they sometimes they can be also a bit restricted on the benefits or on the hospitals that you can visit in order to give those discounted premiums that we can see. And one of the main cons will be that it could be limited to that country, to that specific country. So if you wanted to have cover outside of that country, you may be looking into more of an international plan instead of a local health insurance plan. Um, and then on the last one will be employer provided health insurance, which I think many of you could have this case, right? So this is when your employer provides you with a health plan. So the pros are that it may cover all your family members by default. So all your family, including children, will be covered there. Uh, and in many cases, it comes at a discounted rate. So even if your employer is paying for it, they're paying at a discounted rate. So that's an advantage in terms of benefit. And yeah, it may cover also pre-existing conditions by default. So that's a big advantage as well. And there is one big con, which is obviously that is limited to remaining as an employee of that company. So that will be a big con to consider because it gives you less flexibility if you ever need to relocate, to change jobs or so on. And I put a big note here. So just like the each policy doesn't matter. It doesn't mean that one of them is going to cover more than the other. In reality, all of them could be like the most comprehensive or the most basic plan, or tailored to your needs. But it's important to know what you have available to you, especially if you are on an employer provided health insurance plan. It's important to know what you're covered for, what you're not covered for, so that you don't get caught by surprise. And this happens a lot. Trust me, this happens a lot when people just relocate to a new place, get a new job, and then you don't know exactly what you're covered for, and then you're in for a surprise, right? So that's the most important, to try to understand that. If you need help with that, you can always ask your HR. If it's an employer provided, if it's a other type of plan, you can ask also a broker like myself. So it's important to understand that. And then I put the last one, just to try to keep it short, a few practical tips. Once again, I'm not trying to get into any specific, just practical tips that I've seen from my experience since I arrived here and since I started working in insurance. Um, First, try to understand the local healthcare system. Now, this can be complicated. There's language barriers and so on, but at least a basic tip can be to have a short list of hospitals nearby in case of emergencies. For your children, have a couple of options that you can go to for children's care. This is very particular. In certain countries, there are only some public hospitals that will treat children 24/7, and there are some hospitals where you cannot take your children for emergencies 24/7 because they're not specialized for that. This is the case for China, for example, in certain cities. So this is important to know. So try to understand it as much as you can, so that you can have at least some go-to places in case something were to happen. Uh, in terms of the insurance, more like insurance choosing, uh, compare your plans, right? Like, don't settle for the first option that comes to sight. There's many options out there. There's many ways to tweak your coverage to accommodate for your budget or for whatever you are looking for, something very specific. Like if you have very specific needs for your children, there's always plans out there that can accommodate for that. You just need to be, patient and have a little bit of put in that effort into understanding the differences. Um, and then just consider what your children needs are, right? Like, so ask yourself this type of question, like, is dental a priority at this age? Maybe for newborns, it's not a priority, but once you get to 7, 8 years old, that you have that probably as a big priority. Is optical a priority, or vaccinations covered in my plan? During those first few ages, you will need probably that type of benefit. Do we have access to providers that specialize in pediatric services? Or is mental health coverage something that you want to have just as an option, right, during that developmental stage of children or teenagers? So these type of questions are the questions that you can ask yourself, so that you can start digging into what type of coverage you may need. And of course, the last one is just it's a complex thing, but it can be simplified. And at the end, if you talk to an expert, that he or she is going to be able to help you to narrow down the options and find that right coverage that you may need. Well, I think the questions and answers we will do at the end. So I think I'll pass it on to you, Armando, and yeah, you can take it from here.
Yeah, no, that was great. I think that was a good introduction of the basics of insurance and what to consider when talking about kids. And as with both of us said, it all depends. You probably need some advice, but don't settle all thinking, oh yeah, my employer gives me something. That's great. That's a fantastic benefit, but you need to know what is it. Because maybe it's enough. Maybe you have the most amazing plan through your employer and you think of retiring there, or your kids are already 18 and technically they don't even belong to the plan, then that's fine. And maybe you don't really need that for that specific purpose, but maybe it's just a super basic thing. So it's always good to know the details, no matter what you have.
Yeah.
So that leads to the next topic, which is the financial aspects of what's next. Let's say you already talked to Ricardo and you know, like, okay, we found the best plan. And what about what happens? Because when we talk about medical insurance, most of the time we just focus on the present of thinking what's going on if anything emergency happens. So that's why I have this financial hierarchy pyramid when it comes to kids. So in my opinion, medical insurance and life insurance are a must for anyone who has kids. Because one is about medical situations, emergencies, accidents, whatever like that, and the other one is also a bit more drastic thing, but it's also something that we should consider, even though it's not the most fun topic to talk about, which is life protection. Like, what are the implications of us not being around? Uh, there are many implications, but obviously we'll try to focus on the financial aspects. So that's something as well that whether you live in China or somewhere else or overseas, you should look for plans that fit your needs, whether that's a local plan or an international. Again, it all depends on what are your needs. When it comes to life insurance, normally for international couples, most of the times I recommend an international plan rather than just local, because if anything were to happen to you and you want that money to be paid for your family to support, you don't want that money, especially if you're in mainland China, to be paid in RMB in a local account. How are they going to transfer a million RMB or whatever protection you have? So it probably makes more sense to have an international policy that does the same thing but pays the money elsewhere. So that's when it comes to life insurance. How much coverage you need? Again, depending on your situation, what are the financial impacts, whether you want that their education is covered if anything were to happen. But yeah, that's the first part of this base of the pyramids. Then moving up, we should also have enough savings, especially maybe when we're younger, no kids, it was not a big deal if we just have enough to survive for a month or two. And when you have kids, you shouldn't be taking those risks because you have mouths to feed, and ideally, you should also have a buffer of savings. Ideally, I would say no less than 4 months of expenses. If you don't know how much you spend per month, that's step one. Find out what you're budgeting, like how much things go on your monthly basis, and then do that. So no less than four, but also don't go too crazy on just having lots of cash doing nothing. So the most cash I recommend, and that's already pushing it, is enough for 12 months. So yeah, that gives you an idea that, okay, if I lose my job, both myself and my partner, we still are good to survive for a full year, and something will come up. And the next part, I think that's another important one. It's education planning. This is a very interesting topic, especially because I've been also working in this industry for a long time. And I see that depending also, there are many different kids and, sorry, many different families. But I noticed, especially with parents who maybe they moved to China when their kids were, let's say, 5 to 10. So many of them, they started something back in their home country, also depending where you come from, but maybe they started something for the education planning back in their home country, thinking of a local education. But now that they are very likely in a more international environment, the kids are more likely to choose a university that is more aligned to that, whether that's the US, some parts of Europe, that may not be the same cost that you were considering back then. So let's think of someone from Latin America saving for a university cost based in Latin America. The college prices in Europe are much, much higher. So that's something to reevaluate, like, oh, is what I'm doing enough or not? So actually today I'm going to focus on that aspect first, since we already talked a little bit about protection. So an important thing to consider is that university fees, and this is just from the US, but that applies to pretty much everywhere. So we all hopefully will know that inflation means everything gets more expensive. However, the normal like inflation for living costs is around 2 to 3% on average on developed countries. So think of Europe, Australia, US on the long term on average. However, inflation in education fees are much higher. It's around 6% per year, which is crazy. So that's something to consider. Like a university costing something today will be much, much higher in 5, 10 years. And that's just because the big business that education is at the moment. So definitely that's something we do need to plan as early as possible. And I want to show you what are some steps you can do yourself to start trying to get a sense of, since you may not know exactly where your kids, especially depending on their age, even if they're very young, probably you won't really know where they may go. But having a general sense of what the cost of different potential locations are could give you a rough idea to start slowly planning for that. So ideally, you want to approach any goal through a smart goal approach to be more precise. So that means having more specific, measurable, and it's like a pathway that gives you a time frame. It makes it more concrete, and it's not just an idea of, oh, I want to have enough money for my kids to go to university somewhere. So by trying to apply all of these things, it will make it easier to set it up yourself for success when it comes to financial planning. So and let's give an example of what's the good thing of doing a long-term approach on this. So let's say you already analyze that maybe university cost right now is 100K, but after inflation and maybe your kid is just born, so you still have 17 years to start paying the fees of university. So you know that it's gonna cost around $260,000. So I'm using this website. It's called Smart Assets, where you can just simply do a calculator, and then it gives you an idea of depending on how much you're investing per month. And you put also the years. It tells you what that amount may be like. So here is saying, okay, so if you started planning for your newborn baby and you start investing $600 a month over this 17-year period where your kid will eventually decide where to go, this is gonna take you to that target. And that's just giving you some rough estimation of $600 a month in RMB. That would be like uh for less than 5,000 RMB per month. And the important thing is that you can see on this graph below that the green part is the money that you'll be investing from your pocket, and then the yellow part is what you get from the returns of making your money grow for you. So we can see that eventually the yellow part will be a little bit more than your contributions. So that's the good thing of investing with long-term approach. That applies to everything, not just education planning, but that's just the power of compound growth. However, the most common mistakes is delaying for whatever reason, whether we didn't know about it or we didn't set this as a priority. So if the goal is still the same, around 260,000, but now you only have 7 years for that to happen. So now you cannot simply do 600 a month. That won't really get you there. So you need to start with a small lump sum and then continue putting around more than $2,000 to get to the same parts. So makes it harder because obviously that means much more of your monthly cash flow going to the same specific goal. And yeah, you just the more time we have, even though you are gonna still make some nice returns from the money better than just sitting in the bank, it's not the same impact. So you can see that the yellow part here is maybe only one third compared to in the other one where it was more than 50%. Uh, at the end of the day, it's all about what are we looking for, and but the best thing is to start as early as possible. But yeah, so that's basically something I wanted to share, that the basics of financial when you have two kids. This for oh, actually the fun part at the very top. Actually, we can ignore the first three parts of the pyramid. I think are the priorities for pretty much every parent living overseas. How you do it, it could be by yourself, it could be through things, but obviously at the end of the day, make sure you are covering that. And if you do need some guidance, whether that's medical or life insurance, obviously you can get support from consultants, whether that's in the insurance aspect or the investment part. So I want to stop my little share there so we can probably get some questions from the audience. So here, before we jump into that, I wanna do a little poll that may get some engagement into what are the main priorities for people. So let me see. Okay. I think right now everyone should be getting a question that says, what is your main concern with your kids? You can choose multiple options. So one is medical protection, one is protect them if I'm not around, what is college fees, or any other medical or financial concern. So this is just it's a private, no one else is gonna see who's saying what, but it's just to get a kind of idea of the different topics that are more important for everyone. So in the meantime, while you are just trying to answer this, you can also use the Q, we can start the Q&A time. So you can use the chat box or the Q&A button, send your questions. Probably this is gonna make it more interactive as well, and just to get, yeah, get your questions answered from any of us live. So at the same time, I wanted to ask you something, Ricardo, and while people are still sending their questions. So when it comes to medical planning when you have kids, are there any main difference about age of the kids? Like when, first of all, when do they, uh, like most insurance take kids? Are there any restrictions on age or not? And then what are the difference when it comes to plans? Like, do you need to change a plan if a kid is after a certain age?
Sure. Yeah, it does. It does actually, and it's a bit tricky because it depends on each insurer and each plan and each country. But I would say the standard will be that kids normally can be insured anytime. After, usually, insurers would like you to enroll them from 30 hours after birth or afterwards. So because during those first 30 days, if you don't have insurance, neither you or your wife, in your case, for example, to give you as an example, have insurance, then the insurer will like to wait those first 30 days to make sure what's the health status of the kid, of the baby, before enrolling him. That's why if either of you are insured, then it's a lot easier to enroll your children into your plan. And even if you are like you may or may not have maternity benefits for your wife, but if she has insurance, she's able to enroll her baby within those first 30 days, even if the baby has was born with a congenital condition or has some medical needs during those first 30 days. That's why it's also can be important in some cases if you're planning to have kids to look into your own coverage as well.
Okay, yeah, I think that's very
Yeah.
interesting to
Yeah.
know. And when it comes about age, any difference? Let's say I already started a plan for my young kid, but now they are teenagers. Does it really make any difference, or it's not a big deal at that point?
No, I mean until children are like until they're 18 years old, they're pretty much the same, even in
Okay.
terms of premium as well. So for let's say from 0 to 18, you're not gonna see a lot of variation in the cost, and also they can be remaining as your dependents for
Mm.
until they're 18. After 18, some insurers they will ask you in order to keep them as your dependents under your own policy, as your children under your own policy, they're going to ask you to provide a proof that they're studying, that they're full-time students, so they're not independent yet, right? So that can go maybe until 2021, 22. And after that, they will definitely have to get their own policy. So they either they're split from your policy, have their own, or get a new policy as an adult.
Okay, makes sense. So one of the questions coming on the chat is about the recording. So yes, this will definitely be shared. So it's being recorded at the moment, and I'll try to send it over tomorrow, hopefully. And yeah, I'll probably upload it on YouTube and send the link to everyone who registered, so you can also rewatch if in case you missed anything. Another question coming on the Q&A box is about where would be a good place to start in looking at where to invest? Well, it all depends on, are you referring to what kind of accounts or what specific assets, which is two different topics. And I don't want to be repetitive with the, it all depends. But first, I want to ask more about if it comes to what kind of accounts are available. I'm not sure where you're based. And if you are based in China, ideally also just an international account or platform or something, because if it's for education purposes for your kids, most likely you will need that money overseas. When it comes how to invest, that really depends on how much time, like how old your kids are. It's not the same if your kids are 3 years old and you have 15 years to invest, where you can afford market volatility, versus if your kids are already 15 and you only have 3 years to invest, then probably you need to be more conservative on that aspect. So for that, probably I'm happy to guide you with that. But if it's just about what kind of accounts, then definitely overseas. And there are options for expats in China that you can use your RMB to invest into an overseas account. Obviously, happy to guide you through that. But yeah, depending on that. So hopefully that answered your question. And what are the most common questions? I mean, I haven't seen any other at the moment, but I wanted to ask you one more thing. What are the common questions, Ricardo, that you get from, or the most typical, how to say, uh, mis yeah, maybe call it mistakes that you see from parents when considering medical protection for their kids?
I would say the main one that I see is waiting until something happens, and I'm sure
Mm,
we've all been there if it's like a first time, living abroad or purchasing insurance in this case, which is waiting until some condition has already been found to start digging into health insurance. So that would be the main one because when it comes to having already a medical condition diagnosed or symptoms for a condition, then getting insurance becomes a lot more difficult, as you may know. So it's always better to at least before you're planning to move abroad and so on, do your research. Make sure to at least understand what you need as an essential, and then from there you can build up later on, right? Even if you're in the early stage of your career, maybe you're still planning in advance, but at least get that basic or like that base of coverage first, and don't wait until something happens because then it becomes a lot more difficult, and in some cases also it also becomes almost impossible to find coverage once like a key or
mm.
like a very certain condition has been found. That will be
Yeah,
the
makes
main one,
sense.
yeah.
And I think this is just this just reiterates the main key about these two things that um the sooner the better, both for medical
Mhm.
and education planning. Because yeah,
Yeah.
the sooner you start your coverage for medical protection, then uh, yeah, all your conditions, as long as they accept you already, has been covered that. And same for education planning. So we already saw the impact of early investing versus procrastinating, and that applies to everything, not just education planning. But yeah, so since I think there are not that many more questions coming in, obviously feel free to connect with us. I want to share one more thing, and when it comes to how would you like to get some support in case you need any. So you'll be you'll be getting right now a new poll. So like, how can we help you? Whether you want more info about medical insurance, and whether you need more info on life education, or whether you need more personal guidance on any of these topics, or simply be invited to more webinars because we have different channels with different topics. So happy to continue sending because the more information, the better. And just want to say thank you again for everyone for joining. Hopefully, you found this somehow helpful. Any closing thoughts or words you want to say, Ricardo, before we let everyone
Yes,
enjoy
I
their
I
nights?
actually
Yeah.
have a yeah. If you have like 5 more minutes for, I
Ah,
want to
for sure.
ask you a question because
Okay.
when
Yes.
you did the first poll, I don't have children, but the answer that most resonated to me, if I had, is probably like how to protect them if I wasn't here, right?
Hmm.
So that would be looking into life insurance. And what would be an exercise that you will normally do, like a quick one for like if I was inquiring for this, like what would be the things that I will need to consider to try to come up with an amount, because that's probably
Hmm.
what I will be like completely lost, right? So
True.
maybe you can give an example. I know it's each person has a different case, but just the things that I will need to consider, maybe.
Oh, yeah, that's a good question because let's say you do know that you need to get life protection, but like,
Hmm.
what's a good amount? Am I overprotecting myself and just paying extra amount of money that I don't need? Uh, there are different things you need to consider. First of all, do you have debts? Yes or no? If you do, then so it's kind of like making a little chart, or not chart, like a little list of what are your uh, responsibilities, financial responsibilities. So the number will come with from many different aspects. So one is putting if you have any loans to pay. So you don't want to pass those loans to children. Maybe there are some loans that are great enough if you pass away. Many are not. Many they're still gonna
Mm.
find the next generation. So that's one
Yeah.
thing to consider. Second one, if you have children and education is an important thing, think about that, whether you feel like if I'm not around, probably my kids will go to my home country and maybe education there is free, then maybe you don't really need to consider that specific number. But maybe you do want to make sure that, okay, my kids are 5. So even though they may not need to pay for education fees, but still don't want to just pass the burden to family to take care of them without just giving them an extra amount to cover. So probably you need to consider how much does it kind of cost to keep my kid alive per month,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
then just multiply that how many years. You need to also consider inflation because things will get more expensive, and so those are the kind of main things to cover. So debts, education, whether those are important to you or not, and also how much money you want to give to the person who's going to take care of your children to make sure that they have enough to support them for an X amount of years. And in many cases, you'll never get the right amount to the last dollar or RMB or whatever, but it gives you a ballpark to work on that. And based on that, then you can start looking, okay, I roughly have a number. Now let's find what are the best options, whether I'm looking for a term insurance that tends to be cheaper because you're just paying for protection, or if you're looking for a whole of life insurance that are more into, okay, you technically are protected for life, but it also builds up cash in case you think you are not going to
Mhm.
pass away and then you can use that money for something else. So there are many
Yeah.
types of policies, but it all starts with how much, not just saying, okay, whatever, 100K or
Random
yeah,
amount. Yes.
yes. But it's a tricky
Yeah.
one. So yeah,
Thanks.
that's a good question. So I think that's it. Thanks again, everyone, for joining. We'll be sending the recording, and yeah, feel free to connect with any of us. We'll be sending our information once I send the recording, and feel free to share the recording with all your friends because I'm sure this is an important topic, especially if you have children. I'm sure many of your friends with children have also asked these kind of questions. So thanks again, and I don't know, that's it. Enjoy your night.
Yeah. Thanks. Have a good night, everybody.